morning. First of all, let me thank Standard Chartered for inviting me for this discussion and to share some thoughts on the topic Economic Outlook 2024, a soft landing with risk, Sri Lanka. So I think I don't want to go back to talk about what happened. I think we all know what happened last 2 years and why we are here. I think it's important to look forward and think about the outlook. That's what's important for people like you. So all are basically making decisions on investment, consumption, your business decision, how you're going to need to have a much more clarity in terms of policy, especially when it comes to monetary policy is our key responsibility, and also overall macro policy together with fiscal policy, monetary policy, and also structural reforms and the governance issues. Those are key areas looking forward. And also what we basically what I like to emphasize is that we need to learn lessons from what happened past, and on that basis we need to make ourselves, our policies, to address the mistakes we did last several years, decades, and also in the short term last several 3-4 years. And that is where it's important for us to learn without forgetting what happened, and then prepare ourselves and form policies to be consistent with, for us not going back to that kind of situation in the future. So on that basis, let me first touch on the overall growth and inflation, and also our responsibility to manage exchange rate stability, exchange rate management, as well as banking sector stability. Then we'll touch on the fiscal, structural reforms and other reforms going forward, how we think policy should be there, and also a few risks that we see, as Bingu already highlighted, geopolitical risks, external shocks, as well as the domestic risks that we might see, and how we need to prepare for all these risks to mitigate or address risks and build ourselves positions to meet those risks. So on the first, on central bank, key responsibility under the new Central Banking Act is to maintain price stability in terms of stable inflation. We all know the mistakes we did from the central bank in the past without being independent central bank, and fiscal dominance basically driven and influenced monetary policy. As a result, we saw that what happened to this country in terms of huge monetary expansion, a huge balance of payment pressures, and also soaring debt unsustainability. All were reasons, key reasons were that we didn't have an independent monetary policy. Now, thanks to the government, the parliament, they have now given us sufficient independence in terms of monetary policy implementation and also maintain financial stability. Now we see the result of central bank independence, and this is where we have been able to implement monetary policy prudently and independently, so that we are able to bring down inflation within the shortest possible period, from the peak of 70% to below close to 1% within 12 months period, from September 2023 to September 2023. And now we know there's a one-off impact on taxes that has some impact, but we are confident that our mandate given by the under the Act, we are not committed. If we fail, we have accountability to the parliament, to the government, to the people why we fail, and we need to correct that independently. So that's a very strong structure now we enjoy and we have. This is necessary for any economy to basically have a right monetary policy. That's the important part. And similarly, the unique responsibility we have is financial system stability, where we all know we had a lot of concerns on the banking sector stability in the past, especially with the uncertainty on sovereign debt unsustainability, and also domestic debt restructuring, and also impact on external debt restructuring on our banking sector. We have been able to carefully manage that difficult situation, and we have been able to stabilize and much confidence on the banking sector stability compared to where we were last year. I'm sure going forward, next important step is to clear any uncertainty on the external debt restructuring, that I'll talk about it, so that there is a much more clarity in terms of banking stability and impact on the banking sector of any restructuring of some of the external debt obligations. So that's to be completed. I think we are making good progress. So that's where I think we are now much more confident about the maintaining banking stability, which is necessary, because if you think about last year, uh, with the sovereign debt crisis and balance of payment crisis, the last thing we wanted is the banking sector crisis. So that would have been the end of the story, so that we carefully managed and wrote that. And also on the external sector stability and also monetary stability, now compared to where we were, then we have been able to stabilize the situation. And also going forward, I think what's important is that why some of the things Bingumal basically raised. There are a lot of uncertainties in terms of risk going forward, both external and also domestic. So several elections globally, there could be changes in the regime, there could be changes in geopolitics issues that we see now, and it could change. And how we are going to meet all these challenges is only way that, as far as I can tell you, is that we need to build buffers for us to be able to meet any kind of external shock or domestic shock. When you look at the last 3-4 years, countries obviously had to face this kind of shocks. For example, first pandemic, for us, the Easter Sunday attack, then the pandemic, and then global geopolitical issues in terms of war in Ukraine, all these things, and plus recent the Middle East, the sea route issue, Red Sea issue, all can happen. How countries have been able to meet all these challenges is by building buffers in the economy. Why we ended up in crisis last year? Because we didn't have a sufficient external buffers in terms of reserves for us to be able to meet that kind of external shock. So we had to let the economy adjust to the external shocks without being able to use our buffers to mitigate that. For example, that's where the key difference between some of the countries, as Miguel says, Zambia, Sri Lanka, Lebanon, even Argentina, countries those who were not having sufficient buffers had to let the economy adjust through the business cycles and let this external shock coming in and have an impact on the domestic economy. Countries those who were having buffers, like in terms of large coverage of reserves, and they were able to manage using their buffers. That's external shocks. This is why it is important for the central bank going forward for us to, any shock is quite possible. Only way to meet those shocks is to build our positions so that we have positions, excess positions, for us to be able to use in a situation where there's external shock. For example, it could be petroleum price shock, it could be a geopolitical, could be access to markets for exporters, all these things. That's where difference between countries, those who are successful, and difference between countries, those who had to go through these difficult, painful cycles, is, from the external side, is a buffers. And also monetary policy is the same thing, because we didn't have sufficient monetary space, and we had fiscal dominant monetary policy. We had lost our monetary policy space. Now we have been able to build our space on the monetary policy by having independent central bank, and also having been able to bring down the inflation. Then we have a space to use monetary policy as an instrument to address any domestic aggregate demand issue that could come from that kind of shocks. Even from domestic shocks, like what we see the next, some of the risks that we see in terms of fiscal. So there's a lot of people talking about what could have implications on the fiscal sustainability, this sustainability during election year. That's a real risk. And only way that we can basically address these shocks on the domestic side is to build fiscal buffers and make domestic sovereign debt sustainable. This is all about the debt restructuring and fiscal consolidation, is to build up fiscal buffers and government be able to meet any kind of domestic shock, so there's a space. That is why if you look at experience of a lot of other countries during pandemic, countries those had fiscal space use that fiscal space to support the economy, support the industry, support SMEs, support businesses, use that fiscal space to cushion out the impact of the pandemic. Whereas in Sri Lanka, they had already lost our whole fiscal space and debt had already gone well above the sustainable levels. Government did not have any ability to support the pandemic affected this thing and then let the shock go into the system. And only thing that supported the pandemic was banking sector in terms of very low surplus interest rates. Some businesses supported moratoriums, but we know the impact of it now. So it's out of not from the taxpayers' money. It was not out of fiscal space. It was out of public money, public deposits, and people who had deposits in the bank system had to pay the price in terms of very low interest, suppressed interest rates, and that provided some space. Whereas countries which had fiscal space, people use fiscal space to support and absorb that kind of shocks when there's a significant impact on the economy. So this is where going forward, it's important for us to stay with the fiscal consolidation process, government ability to raise more revenues, and government ability to bring down debt into more sustainable levels, so that any shock, it could have impact on government debt sustainability or debt levels, could have impact on fiscal consolidation, but short term, government should be able to build buffers and use that space in an event of that kind of uncertainty. That's why it's important for everyone to understand the importance of maintaining these buffers going forward, so that economy can be stabilized and mitigate any shocks, both fiscal and also the monetary and exchange. These are the important points to understand. And also medium to long term, for economy to be able to grow with a higher capacity, that's where the long-term structural reforms are important. Address state-owned enterprises issues, make those industries, state-owned enterprises more efficient. Those state enterprises, although state-owned, they should be able to provide the services at a much more competitive basis and provide, for example, energy. As we know, energy prices are relatively very high. There's no way energy price can be brought down through fiscal cost. It has to come through long-term kind of structural reforms, so that they can bring down cost of production. That benefit can be passed to the economy, and economy can be more competitive with those reforms. Those are not things that can be done in a very short term, but long-term process. Together with that, other one is the governance and the corruption vulnerability. That's one of the legacy issues, important legacy issue that we have not been able to address for a long period. Now there's a priority and identify all the gaps. And recently, government announced the roadmap how to address the gaps in this corruption and governance vulnerabilities. And it's also important to address that part as soon as possible, so that all public institutions, including revenue agencies, including the judicial processes, including make it easier to do business. So those reforms are very important to have a level playing field for businesses and have a very competitive business. Those are the important reforms going forward, and the risk obviously is that this reform program will continue and go ahead during election year is a real risk that we all will have to be mindful, and we need the greater public understanding of the importance of this path. We need to move in the same direction. So those are the key broad ideas, and because there's a lot of discussion on the interest rates policy and the exchange rate is our responsibility as a central bank. Just let me talk about the outlook. And as you know, we are confident that we can maintain inflation around 5%, which means current policy rates that we between 9 to 10%, and short-term rates are pretty close to 9%, is moving in the easing cycle. As Big said, banks are adjusting their market rates, and government securities have nicely adjusted uh, by clearing the uncertainties, and uncertain premium is almost normal now. 3, 6 months and 1 year treasury bill shares are now within our policy rate corridor. That's like normal circumstances. What we expect going forward, market rates also will have to be adjusted for the downward in line with current monetary policy stance. But going forward, if we think, but that we are confident, there's expectation inflation is 5% on medium long-term basis. I think I can say we have some more space for us to even bring down policy rates further once we see very clearly inflation expectation anchored, because there are short-term uncertainty because of the tax increase and energy price increases, some little uptick on inflation in the short term, but that has now basically adjusted nicely, more than what we thought. In fact, if you remember January inflation, our expectation was 6.7%, as we announced in the monthly review, but ended up 6.4%. And February inflation was, our prediction was above 6% still because of the impact of the VAT and second round impact, but it ended up in below 6%. That all tells us, even compared to our predictions, inflation path for next 12 months is shifting below what we thought. That gives us some comfort and some more confidence that we can bring down the inflation to our targeted levels, middle single digit, within a shorter period than what we expect. With that, I think that will create opportunity for the central bank to align our monetary policy stance in line with overall 5% medium term, which means we have some space for us to bring down interest rates further. That's, I think I can share with you. What we look at, all evidence-based based monetary policy. That's where independent central bank can always do. And other part on the exchange rate, that is where we need to stabilize, not stabilize, just to, under monetary policy regime, we all really have to understand this exchange rate policy is based on flexible exchange rate under inflation targeting regime. That exchange rate will have to act as a shock absorber to absorb, one thing, some of the external shocks. Second one, for us to be able to build up resource to meet any excess shocks, so that central bank has sufficient foreign exchange position for us to be able to smoothen out the volatility. Right now we are saying, because of the compressed demand, or the import demand is not picking up yet, but as a result, tourism and remittance are doing well, and exporters obviously are doing reasonably okay compared to what we thought. And as a result, there's a pressure for the currency to appreciate. We are intervening heavily to prevent for the appreciation, and in fact, it is not 100% market determined exchange rate. Obviously, we have been using this opportunity to build up our position. That's why we think we are already above 4.5 billion gross. It's not sufficient. We keep building up our positions and prevent the sharp volatility for the appreciation, sharp appreciation. But we need to allow some kind of adjustment in the market. This is because market-based exchange rate determination regime. But while allowing that, and also we allowing smooth movement either way, but having much more resource in our reserve positions, we have much more ability to intervene if there's a shock. That's what I talk about, all the buffers. And going forward, I know there's concern on the exporters, obviously. As Bingumar said, anyone can have their own predictions on the exchange rate, but as central bank, we don't have any prediction. All I can say, this is the way that we make exchange rate to be determined, and the policy that we adopt to smooth the volatility. And on that basis, different institutions, different rating agencies, or anyone can make their own prediction, but important to understand. And this is where I don't think that anyone can expect exchange rate to be appreciating continuously or fixed at a certain level. That was a mistake we did before. 203 rupees fixed for a long time, and then we ended up in a crisis. So, but that's basically difficult for businesses to make their own decisions. But this is where the banking sector, domestic foreign exchange market, need to be developed and deepened further so that there could be instruments that exporters, importers, anyone doing foreign exchange business, related business, should be able to hedge their exposures from the market. That's where we need to, with the flexible exchange rate regime established and develop, we need to develop foreign exchange market and let the market players to make the markets, let market players to be more active and provide the services and hedges for the people who are basically engaging with your business. That's important understanding on the exchange rate management. I think going forward, if you understand this thing, I think one should be able to make a better judgment on how to manage exchange rate risk in terms of any unexpected shocks, as well as a normal conduct of exchange rate management. That's important to understand. So that's one thing on the exchange rate and inflation. And in terms of growth, I think what we see, we all know we had with the crisis, that 6 consecutive growth quarters, quarterly negative growth, contraction. Annually, we had 8% contraction in 2022, and then this year also going to be our average 3% on annual basis. But we are seeing a turnaround. I think we can see activities are now picking up, and where the first time Q3 was positive on a year-on-year basis, Q4 will be much more positive. And also other early indicators in terms of PMI, business confidence surveys, as well as in terms of other indicators. Actually, we see economy continue picking up. I think that's what we expect. 2024 is going to be a positive growth for the whole year, and that we hope that is, and also credit growth, private sector credit with government fiscal consolidation taking place. Demand by the government with the debt restructuring, demand for resources from the domestic market is now lower. As a result, there are some more credit should be available for the private sector activities, and that will provide some more support for economic activities to pick up. And that is where we expect this year also going to be better. Just to touch on the risk, I think as you said, already I touched on the external shocks and domestic shocks in terms of this elections, deviation from fiscal path, all these things are risk. So we need to prepare for the risks and build our buffers. One other thing I just want to touch on is one recent topic, which is central bank independence. I think, as you all know, domestically, we have now new issue comes up with central bank financial independence. Now it's been challenged with the announcement of salary increase for central bank people. I think in the short term, one of the risks I see, these are two different things. Let me share a few thoughts on this because it's an important short-term issue and risk. Central bank is a state-owned enterprise, that's correct, public institution. But why central bank should be independent? Because central bank is not a public institution that is making or supposed to making big profits or losses. We are policy-making institution. When you make policies independently, there could be losses or profits for the central bank. That's the outcome of policy, monetary policy. But our need for central bank independence in terms of setting wages and salaries for the central bank staff is quite important for us to prevent any undue influence from the fiscal authorities. That was the issue earlier. But I see a risk of now, this short-term salary issue is now being used to compromise central bank independence. That is a huge risk to me. And salary issue, obviously, we can talk it separately, and whether it is appropriate, moral or unmoral, unethical, that's a different issue. But using this issue, people who oppose for the independent central bank, and using this issue to compromise central bank independence by changing law is a greater risk now. That's why I just want to share that thought. And we are now much more accountable to the parliament and public. That's why historically, central bank has been setting wages and rates for central bank staff independently. It's the first time we are coming out and explaining to the public and parliament why we had done this. We have reasons why we have done that. But using that, and as talk going on, using this opportunity to compromise central bank independence is a greater risk. So one example is that in 2019, when central bank independence was basically initiated by a new bill that was presented to the parliament in 2019, I think September or November. Same bill that was presented, but then new administration came into power, took the policy decision. We don't need an independent central bank, we need a central bank which should basically take advice from the fiscal authorities. That fiscal dominance want to be continued. That was the policy decision that was taken, and central bank bill was put aside. We all learn lessons of that within next 2 years. The fiscal dominance monetary policy, we ended up in a crisis. So I think with the independent central bank, we have been able to bring back the stability. And now, unfortunate is people are forgetting the value of independence and try to compromise and go back to situation. There's a huge risk. So I just want to make that remark for you to understand why it is important to maintain independent central bank. It's not another state-owned enterprises. It's a policy-making body for the whole country in terms of monetary policy, in terms of financial stability, and that needs independence without fiscal influence. Any measure that could compromise the independent central bank in financial independence could have risk going forward. So that I just want to mention that. My time is up. I'm happy to have any questions if you have time. Thank you very much.